So it's the end of the day, so I thought maybe we'd just play basketball. Let's be done with all this talking. Let's get, can you imagine the kids in school? I always can. Every time I go to a school and every time I play basketball, I think of how nice it would be if we could just all play basketball all day. But of course we can't. But I am going to talk a little bit about me, the we, and I'm going to talk about how it relates to things like basketball. I'll get to the basketball a little bit more later. But I want to start just by a reflection on this question of the other. The other, as we know, is among us. We might not see them. We might not want to see them. We might be afraid of them. We might have our ideas of who they are. But I'm going to challenge us and say that's exactly the wrong thing we ought to do. I think we ought to approach them quite directly, whoever that other is, and very intentionally engage them in our learning. Okay, so in the teacher's environment, this might be about engaging diverse students with each other to learn about their homeland cultures and to share cross-culturally. For someone like me who's in middle age, it might be me playing basketball, for example, with teenagers. All kinds of ways we can do this. And we shouldn't limit ourselves by not doing it. We should engage people regardless of who they are, where they come from, how they lived, how they live, where they grew up, how they teach, how they have sex, who their parents are, where they go to school. All of that is extraneous because at the end of the day, we've got an awful lot more to learn about than those superficial details. And it's important that we do. It's also important that we kind of pay attention to crowds. And you know what we do? We don't have a choice. Media is a good communicator of crowd think. And in some ways, crowds can be very important. They can inform us. But that can be bad news too. When that information becomes about fear, or if it's driven by anger, it can catalyze in us those very same feelings. And if it does, we find ourselves kind of coming to the lowest common denominator right along with the crowds. We see this when there's major anger politically. You've got one party over here and one party over there, all good people, generally, and suddenly they become thugs on both sides, right? We see this in schools all the time. Good kids. And suddenly you've got one side here and one side there, and they become thugs. Here's a story. Happened not too far from here at a very wealthy community at a high school basketball game. These are students that go to churches and mosques and temples, great teachers, some of the best in the country. And at this game, they were booing the other team back to their food stamps. That kind of disgusting behavior goes on all the time in our world. And we need to reject it. We need to ignore it. We need to think of ways to engage our more pro-social ways of being, particularly in community.
Let me say a few words about the tragedy that's unfolding not far away from here at the Washington Navy Yard. And as we learn more about the courageous Americans who died today, their lives, their families, their patriotism, we will honor their service to the nation. They helped to make great, and obviously we're going to be investigating thoroughly what happened, as we do so many of these shootings, sadly, that have happened, and do everything that we can to try to prevent them. Now, in recent weeks, much of our attention has been focused on the events in Syria. The horrible use of chemical weapons on innocent people, including children, the need for a firm response from the international community, and over the weekend we took an important step in that direction towards moving Syria's chemical weapons under international control so that they can be destroyed. And we're not there yet, but if properly implemented, this agreement could end the threat these weapons pose not only to the Syrian people, but to the world.
So I find this video fascinating, and it really exemplifies me to we in my mind anyway. Of course, President Obama doesn't mention me to we, but that's kind of exactly what he's getting at. He had a press conference scheduled, to talk about Syria and the issues there. Of course, we're right in the middle of all these decisions as a country on what we're going to do about Syria. But this major tragedy happens, if you heard him say, not far from him in D.C. when the Navy Yard shootings were going on. And immediately we, as a country, like he as a president, feel something very deep and visceral. We sort of forget all those superficialities. We didn't ask what kind of students or what kind of people at the Navy shipyard were killed. That wasn't our first question. All we knew was that there was violence there. And then he moves it forward. He started talking about Syria, and all I can think of is here's the president, and the whole city is locked down, or good portions of the schools anyway are locked down, and his own daughters might well be in lockdown because of violence nearby. Then he's talking about Syria. We're going a world away. Again, we're feeling, whether we like President Obama or not, we're feeling what we imagine those Syrian families are feeling, and we feel afraid for them, we feel concerned for them. And we begin, again, not saying anything about the personal about the Syrians. All we care about is they're being hurt, and we need to do something about it. So this is me to we, right? I think we can take it even further. When that happens, we start seeing these positive crowd contagions. People start saying, instead of, there's nothing we can do or it's their fault, we start saying, one person maybe just starts saying, I think we could do something about this, and maybe we can do something together. This also is happening all over our country. Just as all the negative social contagions are happening, so are the positive ones. And these are the ones that I think we need to pay a lot more attention to, and I think we need to very intentionally try to set a few more off in small ways and in large ways. So that's what Me to We tries to do. Very intentionally takes different people together, brings different people together, and these could be people at your coffee shop, they could be people in the classroom, they could be people at your office, your community, people on your Facebook across the country or world. And the idea around Me to We is to pay attention to our own shared interests, to begin meeting each other and identifying what it is that we all care about, regardless of our differences, to start talking about our similarities. And around those similarities, to break down what might be some solutions into smaller chunks so they don't seem so big, so Syria doesn't seem so big, or school bullying doesn't seem so big. But we as a group can do one little part about it, maybe even more. And then to together develop a plan and deliver it, to take it through. We do a lot of talking in this country, and frankly it drives me crazy because there's these brilliant ideas and all these crowds of people, and in every single crowd there is brilliance. Every person, in my mind, regardless of age, gender, where they come from or who they are, has got tremendous potentials. And what we do is we talk a lot, but we don't engage those potentials. So in our groups, we can engage each other's potentials and deliver a plan. And then when we do, we should intentionally pay attention to how it went for us. We should reflect on what we did. Did we do okay? Did we have some struggles? It can be very messy to do this work. This is why people think they don't want to do it. Well, that's kind of crap in my mind. The messiness is humanity, folks. I mean, it's what we do. Relationships are not clean and easy. If anybody has a perfect marriage in here, would you raise your hand and tell us how clean and easy it is? Children? You got children? I do. It ain't clean, I'll tell you that. But it's very enriching to work in relationship, even with people that might, we think, be the other. Okay? So when we reflect, we can kind of look, how did we come together? Why did we come together? How can we do this again and better? In fact, what's interesting is Race to the Top, which is the government initiative for education, as you all well know, some of you are probably having to live up to it, is finding that it's got some issues, right? But it's finding that when schools are collaborating with teachers, when they're making teachers part of the cohorts discussing solutions, they do better. When the school culture is more engaging and more inclusive, those are the ones that do better. There's a lot of other problems with it, but there is some good signs, and the only good signs that I found anyway, and the research, there may be more, but I think the most profound ones are these, that collaborative work across difference is what's succeeding in Race to the Top. But I suggest anyway that we should amend Race to the Top. I think Race to the Top smacks of individualism, which is okay. The problem is when you have individualism, you have winners and losers. That might be okay, except for the problem is when we have a lot of losers, as we all well know, we don't do so well. Because our winners are getting grumpy because they feel like they have to support the losers, right? And the losers don't get any happier or any better, generally. Not on their own, anyway. It invites blaming and backstabbing and more division, more of this antisocial behavior that we see far too much of in this world. Obviously, it creates competition for resources. I think this is the most troubling thing of some of our programs that we have is basically we've only got so many dollars and so many people to initiate and deliver them. What if we instead did relay to the top, a me to we relay? This way you're bringing together groups, learning together. They have the same need. They need to learn about numerous different things in school. You can do this in any course or any curriculum. Bringing together diverse students to bring together their diverse gifts. So this doesn't assume that there is a static model of the absolute right student. In fact, it's exactly what nature has done for years. Works perfectly well. Here you have a diverse, complex system with all kinds of different factors moving into it. They're diverse. Rain is very different than dryness. Leaves and roots are pretty different, but they're interdependent. Through their diversity, they actually do better, right? So here's my own personal me to we. It's my own, well, part of my cohort. Let me just show you this. All of these people, by the way, are people that I got to know right here in this community. So you've got Ramona down in this corner, my best friend in middle school. You've got my teacher who grew up in the 60s and therefore taught me to question authority. And then you've got over here Harry Boyd. Harry worked with Martin Luther King when I was born in 1964 and now calls me his colleague. Very different. We're all different. There was Hamza. You didn't see him. I'm sorry, didn't point him out, but he was in the corner. Hamza invited me to play basketball at the YMCA. Now, Hamza's this hulking kid that goes to school at this school. Huge kid. He was 14. Great basketball player. I'm a middle-aged mom. I had my 8-year-old son with me. We were crappy. But he had a problem. His problem was he wanted to play basketball and there was nobody else. So he invited us. When he invited us, we all learned a few things. He learned resourcefulness and adaptability. My son and I learned how to play basketball better, helped him. I learned if Hamza, this black kid, big strapping, quiet black kid, invited me, why couldn't I invite people different from me to play basketball? What happened was something of a pay-it-forward effect. And now, when you go to those courts, whereas you never would see a girl on those courts before, now you see all kinds of girls and all kinds of kids of all kinds of ages, sizes, and abilities. Maybe like this team. Diverse team. The middle-aged mom, her nemesis, her former nemesis, and the young startup. Here's where I first learned me to we. I've taught it to adults, I've taught it to students, including high school students, 500 sophomores. It was fantastic. But where I learned it was with Arnie and George, 2 second graders that I tutored. Now, Arnie was exceedingly shy and very clumsy and hardly verbal. George was completely the opposite. George was hyperverbal, hyperphysical. I had no idea how to tutor. The only thing I could think of is if I brought a football along, because they did indicate they both liked to play, I might be able to lure them into working a little bit and then throwing the football, and it worked. I saw at some point George teaching Arnie how to throw a football, and the light bulb went on in my head. I wasn't doing anything. George was teaching Arnie. So I decided to try that in the reverse mode. I asked Arnie to help me manage George. George knew he was a little bit wound up. So I said, Arnie, what are we going to do about George? He said, let's count to 5. And if he doesn't settle down, he doesn't get to play basketball. And it worked. So these two guys were teaching each other, and they were teaching me. And in the meantime, they learned how to read and write a little bit. If they were in the me to we process, I take the groups through a series of questions, very short questions, and they use a Venn diagram, one side square, one side circle, and they're asked to find their shared value, a shared value, to make a statement about that, and to develop a plan around that. And then within that plan, because we have to satisfy those people that like measurements and quantified data, and I don't think it's a bad idea anyway. As a business owner, this is exactly what we do in business, so it's real world, to identify ways that they're going to measure their success. How are they going to know that they succeeded? Some of you might recognize these two stand-ins for the future, Arnie and George. They work for the Department of Education. One of them's the boss. I imagine they were just like Arnie and George years ago, as was I. These guys' story touches me deeply. As a kid, I had the fantasy that everybody has. Wait a second, maybe everybody doesn't have this one. I thought I wanted to be a professional soccer player or the President of the United States. Well, I'm neither, but that's okay. It was good to fantasize, and it did help me strive. But in second grade, I would have been considered I was so shy and so quiet, I would have been considered probably autistic if they were looking at those things back then. I was also so physical and so distractible, they would have considered me ADHD. I didn't have any me to we to work with. Thank God I made it through. But I could have done far better if I'd learned with groups rather than all by myself. That's my challenge. How do we learn from each other, not in isolation, in ways that we all develop and find our potentials? That's all.